Alaska Department of Fish and Game announced that for the first time in U.S. history, the Bering Sea snow crab season is canceled. For the second consecutive year, Bristol Bay red king crab is also closed, citing in a statement long-term conservation and sustainability of crab stocks.
There is a small bear die season, a little over 2 million pounds, and we have to make that decision of whether it makes sense or not for our boats.
The Dwyers are part of the 2 to 3 vessels equipped to catch that crab of the 60-vessel fleet within Alaska Bering Sea crabbers.
We understand when the state shuts us down for conservation and to take pressure off the stock, but what we're not seeing is the state also taking actions on other sectors that have fishing impacts and affect our stock as bycatch.
This news trickling down to coastal communities, processors, and local markets.
Once the holidays start, there won't be any more king crab.
And making fishermen families wonder.
As fishermen, we are stewards of the resource and of our oceans, and we do care tremendously.
Will they be able to pass on their legacy to the new generation?
At the end of the day, we're fishermen.
Hey everybody, I want to welcome everyone to another episode of Tab Talks. Okay, today I am joined by marine biologist major, and as far as I'm concerned, resident expert, Edward Zong. Welcome to Tab Talks, Edward.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the reason I've got you on the show, the last couple of days, we've been reading and hearing that the Alaskan Department of Fish and Gaming has officially canceled the snow crab fishing season. And that's a huge big deal because they've never done that, at least for snow crabs. And upon further reading, you find out that 1 billion snow crab are missing. That's right, 1 billion with a B. And for me, when I read that, because I like crab, I'm thinking missing, where did they go? Did they die? Did they move? And what implication does that have for us as a society when you see a species just disappear in those kind of large numbers? So I'm joined today by Edward because he's going to try to kind of educate us on marine ecosystems and potentially what we're seeing, so that as we're watching this story unfold, we'll have at least a better interpretation of what's happening. So I guess I'll just kind of start right in, Edward. Can you explain to our audience what the study of marine biology consists of and why you found this an interesting path of study?
Yeah, sure. So the study of marine biology basically is focusing on studying marine organisms and just marine life forms. More specifically, their behaviors and their interactions with their immediate environments, like their local ecosystems and such. And so in order to, understand those aspects, study another field that we have to look at is this thing called biological oceanography, which is basically the study of the physical, chemical, and geological aspects of the ocean, of the sea. So a lot of that, so for example, things like waves and eddies and ocean gyres, and also like natural climate events, these things influence a lot on animal behaviors and the interactions, like where they go, and if they migrate or not. Because we're trying to learn about behaviors, a big part of marine biology is also conservation and management. So that's definitely another part that a lot of people tend to specialize and tend to focus on.
Okay, well, you've given us an excellent understanding. So if anybody out there does not understand marine biology, you just had an excellent 101 explanation of all the things that it encompasses. Okay, I got a lot of questions. Okay, my research by Jackson in 2008, he decided or discussed that there were 3 major drivers of marine ecosystem degradation. He said that 1 was overexploitation, 2 was nutrient and toxic pollution, and climate change. And he further cites that while people have always lived on the coastlines, this is nothing new, that over time, the development in these coastal areas has contributed to what we're seeing, the collapse of these marine ecosystems, overfishing, building of dams, climate change. All of these are affecting the health of the areas. And I guess there are many basic components of marine health that we see. And one such thing, I guess, is an estuary. I was reading about estuaries and I thought, well, what is that? And why is that important to marine life? So can you give us kind of a one-on-one understanding of what is an estuary and what does it do?
Estuaries are basically like these areas where fresh water from rivers, they sort of merge with salt water from oceans. And like these areas, this merging of the water, they create this new type of water known as brackish water, which is basically just water that's not fresh and it's not salt. It's sort of like in between. And these areas, these estuaries, are typically bordered by these wetlands. They're sort of like mud flats or salt marshes. And these places, one thing that's special about these wetlands is that they typically are home to a special type of plant known as mangroves. And these mangroves, they kind of look like trees. They're very small trees, they're like mini trees, but they form like these huge patches like of a forest. So we call them mangrove forests on these wetlands in the estuaries. And these mangroves are special because one thing is that they are one of the they have a special trait is that they can basically live in salt water, right? Because the brackish water, there's salt in it. Most plants are unable to do that because they don't have anywhere to like filter out the salt. But for mangroves, the excess salt just goes into the leaves. That's actually pretty cool. You can actually see that. And another thing is because these mangroves are able to live in this type of saltwater, brackish water, they have a lot of these roots and stems that go. They kind of like they spread out a lot, and each of these plants, these mangroves, their roots kind of just go straight into into the land, into the soil. So you can actually there are each of these mangroves, they have a lot of these stems and roots, and they stick up there from the surface. You can see them on the bottom of these mangroves. And because of these things, like this abundance of roots and stems, these mangroves act as a sort of a barrier, if you will, for against the larger prey, like against larger animals, larger predators, against so that it protects these smaller animals like fish and shellfish, for example, salmons and oysters. It protects them from like larger predators because they can't get in. These mangroves are very strong. They're very they're support like they're very strong, attached to land. So it's almost impossible for these larger predators to get in, and attack these prey. So these mangroves act as a sort of quote unquote nurseries of the sea. So they help these smaller animals sort of raise their young, their offspring, and it helps them, they can lay their eggs there and everything. Is a very safe haven, I guess, for these smaller animals. And so you can typically find a lot of marine biodiversity there. So a lot of fish, shellfish, and just maybe even some smaller baby sharks and things like that. There's a huge amount of marine biodiversity. And another thing is that these mangroves also help with filtering pollutants. So not only because they're plants, right? So they absorb a lot of the carbon dioxide and the carbon from the air, and then they release a lot of oxygen. But these roots again are very strong, so they're able to protect. They're able to filter out a lot of the pollutants from the water. So a lot of silt and stuff, and sand, and just stuff that people dump into the water. Stuff that you really don't want going into the ocean. And also larger, larger pollutants like trash and things that we can see. So these mangroves also protect from that, and it helps to make the oceans and the water clearer. So these estuaries are very important, because they're almost always, they're home to these mangrove forests, and so they're they help protect I guess help improve marine biodiversity, and they help filter out pollutants.
Okay, wonderful. So everybody understands this. The estuaries they serve a purpose. So we're starting to see some really intelligent design. So when you're looking at bodies of water, these different areas do different things. And I think Edward has given us an excellent explanation of why the estuaries are important. Okay, so I'm going to move on then. So now we push the panic alarm because we've seen this unprecedented disappearance of these Alaskan snow crabs. And this isn't the first time we've seen a disappearance at high numbers of marine biology, of marine organisms. We first saw that with oysters. They were the first invertebrates to suffer extreme extermination or depletion as a process called dredging. So can you describe for our listeners what is dredging and why was this practice so harmful to the oyster population?
Right. So dredging it's basically the removal of sediments and debris from like the bottoms of any ocean bodies of water. So like whether it be oceans or rivers or lakes or any body of water, really. And they're mainly removed due to their need, due to like a lot of sand and silts. They sort of block up like these channels and harbors. So they do this a lot on in rivers and in rivers, because it's very important for for a lot of ships, for them to have a clear passageway, for them to for them to try to move through these channels and these harbors. And so in order to clear them up and make sure that they have enough room to move through, they developed this process of called dredging. So they basically remove a lot of these sand and silt and other things that may have dropped onto the bottom of the waterbed. There are several, I guess, downsides to that. One is that it can damage a lot of the fish like spawning grounds, because fish, they tend to they may have lay their eggs or like things like that, like at the bottom of the water, at the riverbed. So by dredging and removing all of that, you're really damaging a lot of the fishing, the nurseries. So that's one thing. And another is that they can unstabilize like the riverbanks, because if you're dredging and you're removing a lot of the sediments from the sides of the riverbanks, that can weaken the foundation quite a bit. And so you're kind of you're kind of risking you're taking a bit of a risk here, like if you're not paying attention to where you're dredging. Yeah, you can, if you weaken the riverbeds enough, the riverbanks, I mean, they can they can collapse and things like that. That can be pretty pretty damaging. So you definitely don't want that. And another thing is, when you dredge, you are kind of suspending a lot of the silt and dust and other sediments, and you're kind of like because you're disturbing it. So some of it, like they can, a good amount of it can go into the water, and that can result in lower oxygen levels, because they're taking up the space. They're disrupting the amount of oxygen in the water. And it can also release like any sort of some pollutants and chemicals that were in the sediment. So you're trying to remove it, but in the process, you kind of disturb it, and some of it can like flow into into the water. So that can be pretty harmful to organisms that live there. And specifically about the case, regarding the case of the oysters. So basically, dredging does several things to basically oyster reefs. One thing is that they can actually prevent small oyster, I guess, larvae from attaching to surfaces, because oysters need to be able to attach to somewhere, for them to grow and to receive the nutrients, right? They can't just be free flowing in the water. And dredging kind of makes that difficult, because when you're dredging, and then, like I said earlier, can have a lot of the sediments sort of like, flowing everywhere, and then they create these they cover these surfaces on the waterbed. And then when you have that happening, it's basically impossible for these oyster larvae to sort of attach. A lot of this can disrupt the oysters, sort of their respiration and their feeding, because oysters are basically like they're filter feeders. Like, they basically filter the water to get their nutrients and their food. And so if you have all of these sediments, sort of in the water, and sometimes when they pick up the sediments from the dredging and then they dump it somewhere, right? This acts as sediment. They have to dump it somewhere, and then sometimes they just dump it straight near like the oyster reefs. So that's like, particularly damaging. You just got all the sediment like on these oyster reefs, and now they have like just a ton of sediment. What are they going to filter, right? They're just filtering sediment. Like, there's nothing, there's no water to filter. So you got all the sediment, on these oyster reefs, and that's basically suffocating them. Like, it's like, it's a reduction in their ability to respirate and feed, and so you're basically killing them. And if you do that, because you're filling these oyster reefs again with sediment, you're also preventing a lot of other fish and smaller fish and marine life that kind of depend on these oyster reefs as places to to nurse their young, because sometimes these oyster reefs, similarly to mangroves, they sort of act as a sort of a safe haven for these smaller fish to nurse their young. So if you dump all this sediment onto the oyster reefs, you're basically preventing that from happening. So you are you're damaging these fish from finding shelter, from seeking food. So you're causing quite a bit of damage. You're basically like killing the adult oysters that are already alive, and then you're killing the young. You're preventing the young oysters from finding a place to settle. So it's quite damaging.
We're investigating how dredges operate on the seabed so that we can identify where the key problem areas are. The main issue is dredge saturation. That is that they fill up very quickly after the beginning of the tow and cease fishing. What happens is that there's a lot of other shells caught during the tow along with oysters, and these are often shells of dead oysters, which are very light, and they tend to coat the filtration surface where the water's flowing through the dredge rings. Very quickly the shells migrate to cover the entire filtration surface. That creates a pressure wave in the dredge which doesn't allow any more material to enter, and so the dredge stops fishing. If we can, in the first instance, improve the filtration of oyster dredges, and they can fish for a lot longer on the seabed, then we can increase their efficiency. Some of the approaches that we've tried is to look at modifying the existing design, because it's a very efficient design in terms of its use, by changing the ring size. And so the issue is to get a happy medium where you're retaining large numbers of legal size oysters but minimizing the bycatch and the pressure wave. We have tried other methods. Bottom contact's also important, so the amount of time that the dredge is in contact with the seabed.
Okay, so I want to stay on the oysters, because we talked about oysters. One of the things that oysters do basically is filter and clean our water. And I guess they can actually filter up to and clean up to 50 gallons of water a day. So if we're taking a natural filtration system like oysters out of play, we can start to see why it impacts the marine ecosystems in a really negative way. So why have we been less than successful as a people? And this is probably just a loaded question of being able to address pollution in our oceans and in our rivers, because it seems like we're adding to this. It's kind of like we have these unintended consequences of all this technology we have, but this technology seems to have some unintended consequences.
Right. So, yeah, we do like we have a lot of these new technologies, and but a lot of the times we do tend to ignore or just disregard a lot of the consequences that come along with them. And I think the main reasons, and again, this is sort of this is sort of my personal opinion. Like there might be some other reasons, but I think the main reasons why people tend to disregard this issue of pollution in our seas is because of one is that it's seemingly irrelevant to them. And I think these points that I'm about to make can also be related to the issue of climate change, and I think they all apply to both of these issues. So one is that yes, people seem to I think they believe that this issue is kind of irrelevant to them because if you think about it, like these pollution, it's happening. First off, it's not even happening on land. Like it's not even happening like in places where we typically can see them. And it seems like it's an issue that's far away, right? For some people, like they live inland and they think, oh, like this issue is something that's that's happening hundreds of miles away from where I am. Maybe I'll never go to the ocean. Maybe I'll never see this stuff. Maybe how do I know that this impacts me? Perhaps they think that it's so far away from them that nothing's going to happen. It's not going to affect their lifestyles. And I think like that's pretty much what people think of climate change as well. They think that, oh, this is such a this is a big issue. This is something that is widespread. Perhaps it's never going to affect where I live. I'm never going to feel the issues of this problem. So they think it's kind of relevant, and so they ignore it. Another issue is the size, or like just the scope of things, because I believe that, like similarly to climate change, the issue of pollution is that it's over such a widespread area, right? It's over like you have I think like a billion cubic kilometers of water like on the planet, so it's over a huge area of space. And so again, this leads to back to the first point, is that it's over such a large scale that people seemingly just can't, they feel like it doesn't affect them. They can't really relate to it because it's not very localized. It's not like it's not like a thunderstorm or a blizzard or something like that just it affects you, right? It affects that one city or that one town. So people say, okay, it's affecting me. It's altering my lifestyle. So I have to, I want to solve this problem, right? I want to change that. And here it's just over such a wide area, and it's not even over land, right? So it's over the ocean. So it's particularly difficult for people to sort of relate to this problem. And the last reason, I think, it's just the time, because the time it takes for a lot of these pollutants to be noticed, for this pollution issue to be picked up on. I think it's over such a wide over such a wide amount of time. It's years, decades, even centuries. And this is something that doesn't just happen overnight, right? You don't just have all of these pollutants in our oceans and killing all these animals overnight. This is something that's happening over decades, easily. So this is something that people, I think, can also make it hard for them to relate. They're not really seeing the effects of pollution, or so they think, and then they think that, oh, there's plenty of time, there's plenty of time, and there's plenty of space for these pollutants to go. Like, this is not going to become an issue. This is nothing that we're going to see, maybe in our lifetimes. So they think that, both of these factors, this time it takes for pollution to really make an impact, and the space that this pollution takes, both lead to their sort of I guess their belief that this issue is kind of irrelevant to them. And I think that's pretty much the main issue.
I think you make an excellent point, because you're right. Out of sight, out of mind. And if I don't see it, and it could be centuries before I see it, I could just be apathetic and say, look, let the next generation deal with it, or let my kids' kids deal with it. But you're right. It's not until it hits the consumer. In this case, it's probably going to hit a lot of people when they go to their favorite restaurant and they order crab, and it's either 3 times the price or they can't get it at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Give people's attention. Okay, since we're talking about the health, you talked about how widespread the oceans are, and you used an exceptional number. I'm just going to say 70% of the planet is covered by water. In case anybody out there didn't know that, there's more water than land, okay? And I found an interesting stat that 94% of the living organisms are actually in the water. So if anybody is like, that was fascinating to me, okay? So I guess, should we be concerned if one of the largest bodies of on this planet is not able to sustain life? What does that say about us as human beings?
Well,
I don't know. What does that say?
well, I think it's just it makes it seem like, this is an issue that that we're just not taking into consideration really, and that we're not recognizing just how impactful the ocean really is to us, to our well-being. And with that being said, I just wanted to, I guess, list a few of these these things from the ocean and how they sort of actually impact our livelihoods.
Okay.
So these are some of the areas that I think are they're pretty impactful and are things that we should consider, and like why we should think about this issue, and that that it's not something that's like really far-fetched, and it's not something that is irrelevant to us. And so first off is that I think people should understand is that we know that oxygen is produced from plants, and but we don't. I think what we don't know is that more than half of the oxygen actually that we breathe that are available on Earth, up to 80% actually, is produced by these little microorganisms, typically floating on the surface of the water. They're known as phytoplankton. So they're basically a type of algae, and they photosynthesize actually. So they're you can consider them, they're animals, they're living organisms, but they photosynthesize, and they don't eat anything for to survive basically. So they photosynthesize, and so they basically do the same thing as plants, as as trees and things like that. They basically release a lot of oxygen. Most of the oxygen that we breathe actually are from these phytoplankton. So if you are, polluting the oceans, and you can damage a lot of these phytoplankton and prevent them from, photosynthesizing and producing oxygen. So that's one thing that obviously affects us. And another thing is that these animals are basically indicators of climate change, because, for example, a lot of the fish that live in the tropical areas, like along the equator, when you have like global warming caused by climate change, it heats up the water so much that it becomes like the water basically becomes inhospitable for them. And so what do is that they have to be able to migrate and sort of just move along the water streams and things, and they go to these new locations, new habitats where the waters are cooler. So when you see that happening, it's a pretty good indicator that you have a pretty severe climate change is getting pretty bad. And it tells you, it's a good indicator that there's quite a bit of warming. Like for example, in one year, when you see all these fish sort of migrating, moving to another habitat. So that's something people should pay attention to. And another thing is that a lot of these animals, overall, like fish and other marine, I guess, like animals that we eat, fish, shellfish, and things like that, they account for at least 20% of all the animal protein that people eat globally. And in some third world, I wouldn't say third world, but like developing countries, it actually accounts for up to 50%. So they can eat a lot. Yeah, it like a lot of these marine life, it's basically supporting their livelihoods. It's what they depend on. So it's very important that this is that we keep the ecosystem healthy, and we keep the biodiversity, like we keep it there, we keep it strong, we maintain it, so that we have, people have food for to survive. And that's one thing I think many people perhaps don't, they tend to overlook. They don't think that it's such a huge number, it's so significant.